Okay, sir. Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Zenas, I'll start.
Yes, yes.
Please. Dear Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this is Rudranarayan Das. It's a true pleasure for me to welcome you to this World Human Sciences and Management Conference 2021, organized by Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Odisha, in association with Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, and Central University of Odisha, Koraput. The broader theme of this conference is AGNOTOLOGICAL context, disciplinary practices of social sciences and policy fields. On behalf of Center for Adivasi Research and Development, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Mahadev Jaiswal, Director, Indian Institute of Management, and late Professor I. Ramabrahman, former Vice Chancellor, Central University of Odisha, and Professor Sarath Kumar Palita, Dean Biodiversity, Central University of Odisha, and the Acting Vice Chancellor of Central University of Odisha. The convener of this August conference are eminent historian Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda and eminent policy activist, writer, and philanthropist Mr. Charudar Panigrahiji. Friends, this evening we have with us Professor Michel Rabinowitz. Professor Michel is a professor from Fordham University and the former professor at University of Illinois, Chicago, United States. Professor Michel did his PhD in psychology at the University of California in 1982 and MA in philosophy in University of California in 1981 and MA Educational Philosophy, University of California in the year of 1979 and BF Psychology at Albany in 1976. Professor Rabinowitz's research themes are quite interesting and thought-provoking. Some of his themes are beliefs about trauma, perceiving the underlying causes of emotional states, beliefs about sexual assaults in China, polarization of beliefs about sexual assault as a function of political ideology, who's at fault, beliefs about victim and preparator blame in cause of sexual assault, orienting to see invisible law to ignore the irrelevant, teachers' educational beliefs about students with learning disabilities. And there are several kind of books also written by Professor Michel. On behalf of CARD, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to welcome Professor Michel. And today, Professor Michel will be talking about knowledge in times of crisis, importance of psychology for life world. Welcome, sir. Please start your talk. Over to you, Professor Michel.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to talk. I'll share my screen, hopefully. Now, when I share my screen, it turns out that I can see people, so that's good. But the title of my talk is Knowledge in Times of Crisis, the Importance of Psychology for Understanding the Crisis. I changed the title a little bit here. And the premise of my talk is has to do with the role of psychology for understanding behavior and what's going on. So the premise of this is there is a reality out there. There is a truth. Hold on. And we as people do not have access to their reality. Science is a process that allows us to develop more accurate models of that reality. And psychology is a science that attempts to assess the reality of how people perceive that reality. And I'll cover that a little bit more. Okay, so I want to start off by talking a little bit about social media. And when I first started going on Facebook, I was basically told, don't friend people who you do not know for privacy reasons. But after a little while, we started to get friend requests from people I've never met before. And I would actually send out friend requests for people who I did not know. But one outcome of that is making connections. And Dr. Jenna invited me through Facebook to give this talk. So thank you, Dr. Jenna, for that. Another reality of social media is that it allows for the democratization presentation of information. There's an awful lot of information out there, and everyone could basically say what they want to say. And the consequence of that is it leads to a lot of false news, it leads to a lot of misinformation, and it also leads to just stating lies. So the question is, how do we determine what we should consider to be true or accurate, that is a fact, versus a belief? And that's the center of my research here I'm going to be talking about. Now, in terms of understanding what a fact is, or a belief, or knowledge, there's a long history in both philosophy and psychology related to this topic. So for example, Plato first discussed this as having a justified true belief. And a justified true belief was defined as something that is true, a person believes to be true, and has justification for asserting that it's true. And all those conditions are necessary in order to assert that there was a justified true belief. Gettier, much later, suggested that that might be an incomplete model, and other factors should be taken into account. There's also a long history in terms of philosophy of science, about what a fact is or what we should accept a fact is. A fact is something that has been empirically validated, has been replicated many times by various people in varying contexts, and has not been disconfirmed as of yet. Interestingly, I mean, the whole notion about philosophy of science and what we should accept as a fact is that facts are very tentative. That is, we're going to accept it as true only insofar as it hasn't been disproven as of yet. But okay, in psychology, a long history of research having to do with, can people distinguish fact from fiction? Moral beliefs contrast facts with subjective preferences, matter of facts versus matter of opinion, and distinction between fact and fantasy. Now, what's interesting about all this research is the assumption that there are a set of necessary and sufficient features that define what a fact is. That a fact is a classical concept, right? In order for something to be true, it has to have a set of features. There. So the general orientation was to try and figure out what those features are. Okay, in my current research, what I'm interested in, how do people distinguish between a fact and a belief. Are facts, in fact, classical concepts encompassing a set of necessary or sufficient features, or are facts of a fuzzy concept, where features that define the concepts vary depending upon context? So the studies that I'm going to be talking about today all have a similar design. That is, their participants are presented with a statement or a set of statements, and they're asked 3 questions for each statement. One is on a scale of 1 to 4, how strongly you agree with the statement. The second is on a 5-point scale, what percentage of the general adult population would agree with the statement? And third, if they thought this statement was a fact or belief. From this data, we have 3 things, right? Whether the person considered a statement to be a fact or a belief, how much they agreed with the statement, and what percentage of the general population they thought would agree with this statement. And with that, what you could get are 6 different patterns of responses related to how much you agree with something and what percentage of other people you think would agree with something. So pattern 1 is basically saying, I don't think it's true, and I don't think other people will think it's true. Pattern 2, I don't think it's true, but others might or might not. Pattern 3, I don't think it's true, but other people would think it's true. Pattern 4 is I think it is true, and I think others will think it's true. And I don't think others will think it's true, sorry. Pattern 5 is I think it's true, but others may or may not. And pattern 6 is I think it's true, and I think others would also. So you could sort of, these are the different possibilities about others and you. And you could take that and basically you could see what the different patterns would be here. So the basic hypothesis is that statements categorized as a fact should be primarily represented by pattern 6. I agree with it, and I believe others would also agree with it. Statements categorized as a belief should be represented by an assortment of patterns. There are different models of this, there are different possibilities, but for a belief, you could basically, hypothesis is you could basically agree with a belief and think other people would agree with the belief just as much as if you were talking about a fact. So we started off by presenting, and in all of the studies I'm presenting, this is true. We started off by presenting participants with a set of general statements. Half of them we thought would be considered to be facts, and half of them we thought would be considered to be beliefs. And here's the 20 statements that everyone starts off the experiment with. We did this for 2 reasons, or actually 3 reasons. One is to act as an anchor, that is to make sure that they're being able to distinguish between facts and beliefs. And the second is to allow participants to get used to the task. And you can see pretty much in terms of the categorization of facts or beliefs, then this is just an example. This is from all the 5 studies that we did with this. They're hovering around 50-50 with a tendency to orient towards beliefs as opposed to facts. Now, in terms of the rule used, what you can see here is for the general statements, facts are primarily represented by pattern 6, not rules, patterns. And beliefs, in fact, are represented by a variety of different patterns. So that's good. So do people agree with each other on what's considered to be a fact versus a belief? So what we did was we coded, responses that are facts as 1 and beliefs as 0. And for each statement, we took the average across participants. So the statement is the unit of analysis here. If everyone agreed that the statement was a fact, you'd have an average of 1. If everyone agreed that a statement was a belief, you would have an average of 0. If 50% of the people said it was a fact and 50% would said it was belief, your average would be 0.5. So looking at the statements, right? And this is just an example from one of the studies. You can see that everyone agrees pretty much whether a statement was a fact or a belief. And this is true from all the studies that we've shown, that we did. And something's happening to my, okay. So from this data, we sort of get the idea when we're talking about general knowledge types of issues that people are very good at distinguishing facts from beliefs. A fact is a type of belief, but the pattern of facts is pattern 6. So then what we did was we presented participants in each of the different studies with statements from different domains. And there were 5 different statements or studies here. The first one looked at information, and we took all these statements from textbooks or from newspapers or magazines from the web. Study 1 looked at statements having to do with psychology content, memory, psychology of memory, psychology of relationships. Study 2 is history, World War I, Reconstruction, science. Study 3 is science, the circulatory system and evolution. Study 4 is we took statements from the newspaper having to do with political statements. And study 5 in New York, when we were doing this, they passed a bill called the Better Bottle Bill, which basically said that for every bottle you buy, you have to leave a deposit, whether it's soda or not, even if you're buying orange juice or stuff like that. So we took statements about that. Okay, so here are some samples from the different domains. People who are similar in attitudes, values, interests, backgrounds, and personalities tend to like each other. Species are not immutable, they change over time. It's a variety of different types of statements. Okay, and in this case, we did not, contrary to what we did with the general statements, we took statements that we thought might be considered facts or might be considered beliefs, but we did not try and make it a 50-50 split. What we were interested in is how do people categorize the statements, not whether they were really facts or really beliefs. Okay, so in terms of facts and beliefs, just the categorization problem, we see that the domains vary considerably in terms of whether they're considered to be factual oriented or more belief oriented. And especially true with the political content. But the rule use, once again, I just want to present this to remind you of what the data looked like for the general statements. And you can see that there's a very clear distinction between something that is considered a fact versus something that's considered a belief. Now, when we look at the different content areas, we see pretty much a different pattern occurring. That is the use of Rule 6 or Pattern 6 goes down, and the use of Rule 5 increases significantly. And Rule 5, once again, or Pattern 5 is, I think it's true, but others may or may not. And when we look at the political situation, context, what you see, in fact, is it changes dramatically. That is, the use of Pattern 6 decreases significantly. Pattern 5 goes up. But there are a whole bunch of people who say, I think it's a fact, but I disagree with it, which is very interesting. So here we have, do people agree as to whether a statement is a fact or a belief? And once again, this is from the general statements, just to give you an, remind you what it looks like that when people do agree, whether something is a fact or a belief. And here is it for the domains. What you could see here is there's an awful lot of disagreement as to whether something is a fact or a belief, right? And a matter of fact, it's not significantly different from chance in terms of, you have here, for example, a whole bunch of people, half of the people saying it's a fact and half of them saying it's a belief. And when you look at the political context, you see it's very different also, right? There's very little consensus other than the political statements where everyone sort of considers them all beliefs. So there's not a lot of consensus as to whether something is considered to be a fact or a belief. Okay, so for the general statements, the percentage of participants who use Rule 5 for facts were 8%, 16%, 0%, 0%, and 19%. For the academic statements, the percentage who use Rule 5 was 55, 53, 71%. So it rises considerably. For the content areas, the percentage of participants who use rules 1, 2, and 3 for at least one statement that categorized as facts were, and that's, I disagree with it, were 27%, 32, and 12. For the political context, the people who said, the number of people who said at least one statement was, I disagree, and I still think it's a fact, was 50 and 58%. So it's much greater. So the conclusion here, or what I'd like to suggest, is facts are not really classical concept, or they're not treated as a classical concept. They're in fact a very fuzzy concept. And what you consider to be a fact changes dramatically depending upon context. So given that as a basis, what we then went on to look at is the role of culture. And the distinction that we're making, and it's an interesting distinction given the talk is being presented in India here, is the distinction between Eastern and Western cultures, where Eastern cultures are thought to be collectivist, And people from collectivist cultures are supposedly pay much more attention to context and contextual factors, whereas Western cultures are thought to be more individualistic, where people from individualistic cultures view the world in terms of logic and rules. There was a hypothesis that people would think about concepts differently, given this distinction. People from collectivist cultures are less reliant on features and pay more attention to contextual factors. And people from Western cultures are define concept in terms of a set of features, which are then subjected to a categorization rule. Of course, Greg Murphy is here, and he doesn't necessarily agree with this. But what we did was we compared Chinese participants with American participants. And what we used was statements about learning strategies. So some examples of a learning strategy are listeners are less apt to let their attention wander when speakers relate the contents of the talk to the listeners. Watching TV while doing homework will negatively affect learning. Students need to learn how to put a speaker's message into their own words. There are some people who excel at difficult task skills, even though they never practice. And once again, with these statements, everything is exactly the same. We asked them these 3 questions. How much you agree with it? What percentage of other people do you think would agree with it? And is it a fact or a belief? So our prediction was the Chinese sample would be more varied in their use of their 6 set of patterns described above when applied to the statements categorized as facts than the American sample. And because of the increased variability in the pattern use, the Chinese sample would show less consensus as to which statements should be considered facts versus beliefs in the American sample. And also because of the increased variability, the Chinese would be more lenient in what they considered to be facts. And as a consequence, they should categorize more statements as facts than people in the American sample. So here's our rule use. I'm presenting it in a slightly different way here than I did before, because I want to directly contrast the Chinese versus the American population. And these are for the general statements. And what you could see is that the Americans were more reliant on the use of Rule 6. I agree with it, and I think everyone else is. But the Chinese population were more flexible in terms of the use of Rule 5. I agree with it, but others may or may not. And this is with even the general statements, which is just general knowledge type of statements. For beliefs, once again, the American sample actually used more of the I agree with statements versus the Chinese people who use more of the I don't think it's true type of statements. Now for the learning statements, you see the same pattern, except once again, the use of Rule 5 for the Chinese population actually increases. And for the beliefs, you see the same sort of pattern in terms of the American population or participants were more likely to agree with the statements, and the Chinese sample were more likely to disagree with the statements, which we'll come back to because it gets interesting here. Do people agree whether something is a fact or a belief? Here, once again, if you thought of something as a fact versus a belief, they should be sort of towards the sides, right? So there's agreement. And you could see that the American sample pretty much agrees as to what's a factor of belief. But the Chinese people are all over the place in terms of, some of the people say it's a fact, some of them say it's a belief. And this is, once again, is with the general statements, which should be fairly clear as to whether something is a factor of belief. And by the way, just to, the statements were presented in Chinese to Chinese students. Here it is once again with the learning strategies. And you can see once again that Americans sort of considered and agreed to a large extent, although not as much as the general statement, that the statements were beliefs, but the Chinese participants, once again, did not necessarily show much consensus as to whether a statement was a fact or a belief. So how many people rated something as a fact versus a belief? So for the general statements, for the Americans, once again, you see a slight tendency to think of statements as beliefs, not facts. But for the general statements, the Chinese population were significantly higher in categorizing something as a fact. And the same thing is true with the learning statements. If you look at the American population, they pretty much consistently thought something was a belief. But for the Chinese participants, they categorized significantly more statements as facts than the Americans. So my discussion is the tendency to think of something as a fact or belief tends to vary considerably as a function of content, what domain you're talking about, individuals, and also culture. Patterns that categorize facts vary as a function, and they, when in some situations, the patterns used to categorize a fact are very close to the patterns that are used to categorize beliefs. And there is usually very little consensus as to which statements were facts versus which were beliefs. So the argument is, or to go back to the beginning, psychology is a science that attempts to assess the reality of how people perceive that reality. So there might be a real definition as to what should be considered a fact versus what should be considered a belief, but people don't necessarily see it that way. People think of the, not intentionally or not deliberately, but people think of facts and as a very fuzzy concept and use different criteria to categorize something as a fact in different contexts. So I'll stop here and I'll open it up for questions, if anyone has.
Thank you, Professor Mitchell. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Bikram Jena to continue the program.
Thank you, Rudra. Yeah, sorry for the interrupt. Thank you so much, Professor Mitchell. Such a wonderful and thought-provoking talk by you. a little bit idea mismatch with you when your title is Understanding Knowledge in the High Time Crisis of Pandemic. I would like to know a little bit more about the last slide of yours. I start with your last slide when you talked about in discussion the psychology. How many times you try to discussion with your leader, the so-called before President Trump, the Donald Trump, the one of the most vibrant face of the planet, you know. And when we are talking about the cultural crisis and related to the content, what you think in your beliefs, what is important? Culture is important, at the same time we cannot ignore content at the same time. What do you believe, content first or culture first? Then you little bit talked about in your talk related to this high time crisis about to how we comparison with the America and China people. I seriously don't understand when we are intellectual people, we are going to arrange this kind of webinar. We seriously want to listen from you, and you are the best mind as per my views is concerned at the time. You one of the greatest psychologists of the planet, you, Professor Mitchell. It's not, yeah. I seriously gone through your entire biodata you sending me today. I seriously gone through and I shocked a man doing a lot of work. Last 40 years, you are working on the same topic. You're not worried, you're not biased, you're not jargonically different from others. Last, I would like to know more what is important, either democracy or communists. The vibrant ideological battle between two states, one is America and the China. Yeah. Over to you,
I'm
Professor
sorry,
Mitchell.
I didn't hear the second question.
You are unmuted, sir. Sir, you are on. Please unmute yourself, sir.
I'm not muted. Can you hear me? I didn't hear your second question regarding the first question
No,
about.
you are. Yeah.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah. Please.
Okay. Regarding the first question, I think in terms of content versus culture,
Yeah.
I think they both contribute, and they probably contribute independently. That you'd find a main effect in both, but you'd still find significant variations within a culture for different domains of information. So it's not that, I'm sure that we could move within the culture people to be more belief-oriented or more fact-oriented by changing the content. I didn't hear your second question. So could you repeat that?
Yeah. I would like to know more about the democracy and the communist, the ideological battle between these two states. In addition to that, how many times you try to suggest your President Trump in the high time pandemic crisis related to psychology and the science of psychology, as you mentioned in your last slide?
Well, I think one of the things that, if I understand your question correctly, we never looked at specifically having to do with President Trump. But we do have data in terms of categorization of facts and beliefs and agreeing with statements having to do with political ideology. So for example, in some studies, or one study in particular, we presented people with statements having to do with vaccination. And statements were either pro-vax, you know, the vaccinations are good, or vaccinations are bad. And this, we weren't talking about COVID vaccinations, we were talking about just vaccinations in general. And what we found was, once again, the tendency to categorize something as facts and beliefs, and also agreement very depend upon your political ideology. That is, liberals were significantly more likely to agree with and statements that were pro-vaccination as facts than conservatives. And they were more likely to agree with those statements also. We sort of showed a strong relationship between ideology and political ideology and their willingness to say something is a fact or not. Not just whether they agreed with it, but whether they would categorize it as a fact. So in terms of President Trump, or statements regarding President Trump, I would strongly hypothesize that liberals would categorize any statement that President Trump would make as a belief and a false belief at that. Whereas conservatives, given the exact same statements, would categorize them, or certain conservatives would categorize them as facts. Because once again, it's not whether something is a fact or not, it's whether they perceive it to be a fact or not, which is important.
Yeah. Now I would like to know. Do you believe perception related to market when this is the right time to? It's a game changer for Asia over America. What do you suggest, and what is your ideas related to the marketing philosophical psychology of this high time pandemic crisis? This is a game changer.
You're going in and out. I can't hear. I can't hear what you understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that?
Do you believe this is a high time game changer for these marketing people? This is a Asia win over the America. This pandemic should be realizing that this is the game changer of both the continental fight between Asia and America. How do you believe? This is a game changer, or this is a problematic arena for address these issues in terms of global policies is concerned?
I'm not following. I apologize. So, in terms of marketing?
No. Do you believe the ideological jargon, to be very honest, about the subcontinent fight between Asia and America? Here is one more question from Shubham Das.
Okay. How to uncover the fabricated fact that generates belief systems among the people by the political parties using artificial intelligence and complex algorithm to get their desired results and sustain power. How to uncover the fabricated fact. I'm trying to understand the question. I'm sorry.
Can I read for you, sir?
Yeah, no, I could read it. I'm just.
Yeah. Sumop Das is asking for, we are living in an era where objective truth carries less on psychological methodology. To unveil the illusion that has created by the post-truth narration to distinguish between belief and fact. He wanted to know about more the fluctuate fact. How civic culture plays the important role to distinguish between fact and belief, so far as the partial versus participant political culture in concern.
Sorry, it's parochial culture. How civic culture plays the important role to distinguish between the fact and belief, so far as the parochial versus participant political culture is concerned.
Well, the main, yes. The distinction between fact and a belief is very fuzzy. And the civics, the political system should, I'm not saying anything new here, I don't think, should be very clear as to what should be considered a fact versus what should be considered a belief. And unfortunately in America now, that is not happening. That is, people are getting very mixed messages depending upon the political ideology about what's true and what's not true. People are basically have a confirmatory bias where they're thinking that things that they agree with are facts and things that they don't agree with are beliefs. So the motivation of the person is also relevant here in terms of this categorization.
Yes, there is my another question that nowadays of artificial intelligence, the political parties are using some new tactics. You say per se the complex algorithm of the Facebook and or other social media to sustain in power. They also spread their fabricated facts, and people believes that the fabricated facts are true in belief system. So how to uncover that? So what is your ideas on it, that how people will understand the truth behind the fabricated fact?
I got all the beginning part. I didn't get the ending part. So what was the final question?
My question is, there are political parties, they are using fabricated facts. So they are saying false narration before the people, and the people understand that what the political parties are saying are truth, because the peoples are getting biased to the artificial intelligence through the propaganda machinery of the political parties, so that it helps the political parties to sustain in power. So how you look at this? How you address this?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure about the artificial intelligence part, that they're using artificial intelligence to convince people to whether something is a fact or a belief. But even if they were, the notion is people are not very good at being able to distinguish a fact from a belief, right? In school, they're taught to distinguish facts from beliefs using statements like the general statements we used in each of our studies. And schooling about distinguishing facts from beliefs starts early in elementary school, at least in the States. And you can see when we're using the general statements, people are very good at being able to distinguish what a fact is from a belief, right? There's no ambiguity there. But when you get into content domains, right? They don't agree what's a fact, what's a belief. They're using very different patterns or features, pattern of features to distinguish a fact from a belief, or not they're not consistently using the same information to say whether something is a fact versus a belief. When you take that with lack of knowledge and lack of availability of information, so for example, even in science, we don't really say much is a fact. Everything is tentative. That is, we're going to accept it as a fact only insofar as it's not disproven as of yet. But if someone comes along with an argument for why it's wrong, it's no longer a fact, right? So the ability to distinguish a fact from a belief is a very difficult one. And you have to rely on, I guess, people, for the most part, to be able to distinguish the two. There aren't a set of rules that would allow people to, I mean, there is, but each person has a different set of information that they're relying on. Right? So yeah. I'm sorry.
Sir, I have a question. So my question is, as your topic says, knowledge in the times of crisis. So my question is particularly on the issues of Afghanistan is going in the present crisis of Afghanistan. Sir, how do you explain what political crisis is happening in Taliban and what Afghani peoples are doing about to fulfill their knowledge and to fulfill their schoolings, to fulfill their political economy. So what is your view on the knowledge establishment in front of a religious fundamentalism?
Okay. The basic argument that I'm trying to make, and this is a general argument having to do with psychology in general, that is, once again, there's a reality out there, but people do not have access to that reality. People construct a representation and understanding of everything that they're presented with, right? It's a construction, it's made up. And it's made up on the basis of two factors. One is how well you think. That is sort of a strategic type of ability to evaluate information. And the second is your prior experiences, your prior knowledge. The prior knowledge has an effect on how you interpret information, how you construct reality, automatically, without your awareness, without, so people given different cultures, different backgrounds, different experiences are going to interpret things very differently, right? And, if you look at people with different religious orientations, different cultural backgrounds, you get very different interpretations of reality. The basic belief, I think, of most people is that there should be a shared reality. And because, in fact, there is a real reality out there. In fact, I think what psychology is saying is that people rely on their construction, their understanding, their beliefs about that reality. And it's going to vary from person to person. There's no access to what's really happening. So even, given, a non conflicting type of situation, you're going to get a lot of differences across people in how they perceive it. So how infodemic biases affect this high times of pandemic? I think one of the things that we're finding is the notion of fear, believe it or not, has a big effect on your beliefs about different topics. And right now, fear is rampant. So for example, in our work on beliefs about sexual assault, what we find is that we did this study over a period of time where, for the most part, when we first did this study, and we actually did the study around 6 months before the beginning of the Me Too movement. Do you all know what the Me Too movement is in terms of sexual assault? That people basically were coming out, or women were coming out and saying that they were assaulted, and that it became much more popular. So, and a lot of politicians were getting in trouble, and other people of high profile were getting in trouble for having to do with accusations of sexual assault. So we did a study where we looked at whether people blame the victim versus blame the perpetrator. And it's a good thing, at the beginning, what we found was people were much more likely to blame the perpetrator than the victim for the sexual assault. And when I say blame the victim, what do you expect? You dress like, you dress in this sexy, type of thing. What do you expect is going to happen? That would be an example of blaming the victim. Then what we did was we ran the study again 6 months after the Me Too movement started, and actually found no differences in their perception of the blaming the victim versus blaming the perpetrator. But then what we did was there was a nomination for a Supreme Court justice, Kavanaugh, who was accused of sexual assault. And we ran the study again. And in each time we ran the study, we also got some measure of how fearful people were feeling in general. And what happened was, at the time of Kavanaugh, people's ratings of fear increased significantly, and people's agreeing with statements about blaming the victim increased significantly. We ran it again during COVID. And once again, we found that people's beliefs about blaming the victim increased significantly. And also fear was increasing. So the emotional state of individuals has a direct influences on how they perceive information and their beliefs about different topics. All right, so I think that in COVID, there's a lot more, I think, a greater tendency towards conservatism in terms of the general population. Conservatives tend to be more fearful. There's some interesting research that shows that when you take liberals and make them fearful, they become more conservative in their beliefs. And that's, I think, what's happening in the, given the COVID situation also. Does it make any difference whether you and I agree on whether a statement is a fact or belief? If we do agree on its truth, I don't think we're agreeing on its truth. And no, I don't think it makes a difference if we agree whether it's a fact or belief, because we can have beliefs that are considered just as, you know, that I agree with it and you agree with it also. They look very much like a fact, but we categorize it as a belief. But I don't think that working with the same notion of truth here, right? I think it's more a, one group would say it's a fact and it's true, and the other group would say it's a belief and I don't think it's true. So the base premise, if we agree on the truth, it doesn't matter what the categorization is, I don't think. But I think there is a consequence for disagreeing on what the truth is.
Hello, Dr. Jena. Shall I conclude now the meeting? Our session is over.
Let's go for that.
Okay.
Okay.
So, thank you. Now I'm going to address the formal vote of thanks. So I would like to thank Professor Mitchell for joining us so far from the United States, Chicago, and sharing your wonderful thoughts over psychology, and also answering several kind of questions about post-truth and many more. I'm researching about your research methodologies and what you are doing in your academic research. They're quite interesting, and I am going through all your articles. I'm trying to download it all and going through it in future. And we are very happy and quite happy to have you with us. And definitely we are very serious about what kind of discussions are is going to be happens, or it will be the need of the hour. And we intellectual peoples are continuously make these kind of activities over all the global issues. Thank you, sir, for joining with us. And I would like to thank our coordinating institutions, Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, and the Central University of Odisha, Koraput, Director Professor Mahadev Jaiswal, and Acting Vice Chancellor of Central University of Odisha, Professor Sarat Kumar Pandit, and our convener of this August conference, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda, and Shijukta Charudat Panigrahi, and the man behind this program, the Director of Center for ADIVASI Research and Development, Dr. Vikram Kesari Jena. Thank you, Dr. Jena, for meeting us, such kind of fabulous prince of the world. And I would like to thank our team, Professor Shubham Das, Dr. Nupur Patnaik, Samuel Lima, and Dr. Kamal Prasad Mahanti, Dr. Ghanshyam Giri, and all audiences from Facebook and YouTube Live, and here those dignitaries with us. And thank you, and thank you all for joining us. The meeting is now concluded, sir.